This video will go over 9.3 and 9.4, getting you ready for the quiz. Two skills we'll be reviewing today: finding the area of composite figures, which means finding the area of smaller shapes and adding them together to find the total area. And secondly, finding the perimeter and area of a polygon given some coordinates. So here's example 1, part A. We can draw this line here to make two rectangles. And since this entire distance is 21 and only this here is 12, we can figure out the missing one is 9. And now we have the dimensions of two separate rectangles. So we use the area formula for a rectangle, base times height, and we get two separate areas. To find the area of the entire shaded area, then, we just add them together. For problem B, it's a similar process. We're going to divide it into parts. Here we have a triangle, a rectangle, and a half a circle. So we need to use the diagram, the information given, to figure out the missing parts. So this height here is going to be 4.8, because we take 7.8 minus 3. And to figure out what the base of the triangle is, we're going to have to use the Pythagorean Theorem. So that's done here. So we can figure out that that base is 9. And for a circle, we want to be aware of the radius, which is going to be half of the diameter. So we'll call that 4.5. And that's what they've done here. They've labeled all the parts you need to find the areas. So first up, area of a triangle is 1/2 times base times height. So we plug in the 4.8 and the 9 into this formula. Next up for the rectangle, base times height. So we plug in the 9 and the 3 and we get our area. Finally, for the half circle, we're going to use 1/2 times pi r squared. That's the area of an entire circle, and we just cut it in two. So we're going to enter in 4.5 as our radius, and here we have our area. Just add all of those areas together to find your final answer. We did 2 and 3 from the book. So one way to do this is to create a square and a rectangle here in problem number 2. If the entire length is 12, then 5 plus 3 plus 4 is 12. So we know that is a square. So to find the area of the square, we're going to take side squared, which is equal to 4 squared, which is equal to 16 centimeters squared. Then to find the area of the rectangle, this is going to be 12 times 2. Because base times height is the formula. So this is going to be 24 centimeters squared. To find the entire area, we add the two together, 16 plus 24, and we get 40 centimeters squared. For number 3, we have a half a circle and a triangle. So for the triangle, we need to know the base and the height, which we do, 4 and 5. So the area of the triangle is going to be 1/2 times base times height. And we can plug those in, and it becomes 1/2 times 5 times 4, which is just going to be 10 feet squared. For the circle, we're going to use 1/2 pi r squared, because it's actually a semicircle. And if the diameter is 4, then the radius is going to be 2. So we're going to plug that in. And 2 squared times 1/2 is just going to be 2. So this is going to simplify to 2 pi. And if we round that, we get 6.3 feet squared. So both of these, the units should be squared. We have 10 and 6.3. If we add them together, we get 16.3 feet squared. Next up, number 9. We can divide this into, probably just right here, a rectangle and a triangle. That would be nice and simple. So this rectangle is going to be base times height, and the base and height are 7 and 6 millimeters. So our area there is going to be 42 millimeters squared. The area of the triangle is going to be 1/2 times base times height, and we can plug in 12 minus 7, which is 5 for the base, and 6 minus 3, which is 3 for the height. So if I take 5 times 3 and get 15, and I cut that in half, I get 7.5 millimeters squared. If I add these two together, I guess I should be putting 2 m's on all of these. Oops. But if I add these together, I get 49.5 millimeters squared. So for number 10, given the dimensions, it kind of clues you in that we should be dividing with vertical lines here. So we have this rectangle, which has a base of 40 and a height of 20. So base times height is equal to 40 times 20, which is equal to 800 yards squared. Now for these two sides, over here and over here, normally we would use 1/2 times pi r squared. But since there's two of them, we can get rid of the 1/2 and just treat it as one whole circle. And we know the diameter is 20 because that's given here. That's the distance from the top to the bottom. So the radius, half of that, is going to be 10. So here, we're going to be talking about 100 pi, which becomes 314.2, as we're rounding to the nearest tenth, yards squared. If I add together, I get a total area of 1,114.2 yards squared. Here's an example for 9.4, finding perimeter and area when we're given coordinates. So given 4 coordinates, in this case, they are pretty much a rectangle. They look like it. We can verify and prove that it is a rectangle because these side lengths would be parallel to each other, the blues and the reds, red to red, blue to blue, and blue to red would be perpendicular. And that turns out to be true. We can use the slope formula over here if we wanted to, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 to find out those slopes and to prove it. Then we think of a right triangle here, and we need to figure out the base and the height. And if we do so, well, the height's going to be the exact same over here, and the base is going to be the exact same over here, so we can add those all together to get the perimeter. Or we can multiply base times height to get the area. But how do we find the base and the height? We use the distance formula. So remember, this was the x2 minus x1 squared, and then the y2 minus y1, all of that squared. So plugging in the values for c and d, we get this distance, and we can simplify it to 3 root 5. And for the height, we do the same thing. We plug in the coordinates for b and c. We get the square root of 20, and we can simplify that. So remember, this was the base, and this was the height. So if we're going to use the perimeter, we're going to take 2 times the base plus 2 times the height, and we get our perimeter. And for the area, we're going to take base times the height, which gives you this. So from the bookwork, number 3, we can plot these vertices. V is over here at negative 3, 0. W is at 3, 0. And X is at 0, 3. So we're looking at this triangle here. So the base we can actually just count, and it's going to be 6 straight across. And the height is going to be 3. So that's enough for the area right away. We're going to plug in 6 for the base, 1/2 times 6, and 3 for the height. So 6 times 3 is 18 divided by 2. The area is going to be equal to 9 units squared. To find the perimeter, I need to know these lengths. So if I take this 6 and I cut it into 2 equal parts, that means we're looking at 3 and 3. So these are right triangles, and I can use the Pythagorean Theorem, which says that 3 squared plus 3 squared is equal to c squared. So do a few steps, I get the square root of 18. I can simplify the square root because 9 comes out of the radical. The square root of 9 times 2. Square root of 9 is 3. And I get 3 root 2. So I can just add those 3 side lengths together, and I get 6 plus 6 root 2 units as my perimeter. If I wanted to simplify that and round it to the nearest tenth, this would be 14.5 units. Number 5, that we're looking at a rectangle. So I don't have to do a lot of math here. I can just count over and count up. The height is 4. This distance is 10. The area of this rectangle is base times height, which is going to be 10 times 4, or 40 units squared. The perimeter is going to be 2 times the base plus 2 times the height. So this is going to be 2 times 10 plus 2 times 4, which is going to give me 28 units. For number 12, we're looking at a right triangle. I can count. This height is going to be 6. This distance is going to be 8. Area of a triangle is going to be 1/2 base times height. So it's going to be 1/2 times 8 times 6. So 48 divided by 2 is going to be 24 units squared. For the perimeter, I'm just going to add up the 3 side lengths. 6 plus 8 plus what? And to find that, I'm going to use the Pythagorean Theorem. So this is going to be 6 squared plus 8 squared is equal to c squared. So 100 is equal to c squared, so c is equal to 10. And that's what I'll plug in here. So my perimeter is going to be equal to 24 units.